Okay. Can anybody hear me? Maybe? Let's do that. Yes, thank you. Okay. All right. As usual, put your name in the chat. Let's see. Let's move that over. I don't know if I can do that. All right. We're a little bit early, so we'll just kind of hang out till other people get here. I have lots to say, but I'll kind of wait till more people are here. Got a couple minutes. Okay. I want to remind people, turn in assignments. Going through the grades, probably will be finished grading sometime today. If you have outstanding assignments, turn them in so that you can get credit for them. Forums should be completed. Lab assignments submitted. Those types of things should show up before the end of the week. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. Again, if you just showed up, put your name in the chat. Okay. All right. All right. So this is our last meeting. Okay. Next week is the only scheduled activity is the final exam. The final exam will open Monday morning, I think at 11, and it'll close Tuesday night, you know, kind of 11:50 or something like that. The final exam, that's my last chance to see what you can do. That covers materials from each of the chapters, so would be good if you did well on that. That makes it easier to give you, you know, if you fall on a board, it makes it easy to give you the higher grade. The final exam, you have 2 hours to do it. So it's longer, but it's most of those questions you will have seen before, perhaps not all of them, but most of them. And there is particular emphasis on physiology, how things happen. How does this happen? How does that happen? Why does it happen? You know, how does the cell do this? How does this type of cell do that? And so there's that kind of emphasis. Let's go look at the review stuff. And so I'll share a screen. Again, if you came in late, make sure you put your name in the chat so you get credit. Okay, does anybody see the PowerPoint that says with the big-headed guy? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, thank you. All right, so final exam is worth more than the other exams. It's worth 150 points. It's longer, but you have 2 hours to do it. So you have twice as long. It's only about half again as long. It's mostly multiple choice and true-false questions. A lot of those will come from the quizzes. That's a good way to study. The quizzes are still open for another day and a half there. So if you want to improve your grade on the quizzes, you can do that. There are true-false questions there as well. And of course, there will be some essay questions, and they'll be right at the front of the exam. So you'll have time to do that. There is materials from each chapter. So there we have a lot to go over. Let's see here. If I can get this guy. You know, there's time to study in several short sections. Use active methods to study. Take notes. Use self-quizzing or practice quizzing, and study in short sections. 10, 15-minute sections, that's probably it. And take breaks. That will help you remember it. You have a tendency to remember more at the start of a section and more at the end. And so if you have more short sections, you'll remember more. There's not time to reread everything, but there is time to go over all the chapter summaries. I'd certainly advise that. There's time to look at all the chapter hints or study guides. They have vocabulary on those. That would be good to look at. All the materials are available on Moodle, can be looked at. Again, plans, frequent short sessions. Cramming is good, but you'll remember more if you study in a bunch of short sessions. There's plenty of time to do several days worth of that. So recognize what's most important, what's most likely to be asked. Big topics, things that showed up on other exams are likely to show up on this exam again. When I'm making a final, I'm not trying to fool anybody or ask questions on topics I missed before. I'm trying to see if you still remember things, or if things you missed before you've actually learned now. So the big topics on the other exams are the same topics that are important here. Things like homeostasis, how cells work, the functions of the skin, the functions of the skeletal system, how bones grow, calcium homeostasis, synovial joints, the function of joints, muscle functions, how muscle cells work, what does muscle tissue look like, contraction, how does muscle physiology is contraction. Again, the function of the whole nervous system, the organization of the nervous system, how neurons work, membrane potentials and synapses and neurotransmitters, brain regions and the function they have. Then on the somatic nervous system, eye and ear things, functions of the frontal lobe, autonomic nervous system, the neurological exam. Those are big things, and they'll be big things again. There are some things that their book spends a lot of time on that I probably wouldn't ask, or may ask, but won't be major topics. Some things are things covered in lab, like anatomical position, relative position. Those are more minor topics for us. The idea of organs, systems, and body cavities, I'm assuming you'll get that. Things like water, organic chemicals, cell organelles, those were introductory topics, and I'm hoping that you pick that up by kind of when we talk about specific things like the functions of a neuron or the functions of a muscle cell. Likewise with tissues and protein synthesis. Okay, there's not going to be a lot of basic chemistry. There won't be pictures of tissues for you to ID. There won't be bone or joints for you to ID. There won't be muscles to ID. That was lab stuff, and so that we'll skip that. Often what I'd like you to do is go back and just be able to summarize topics. What is homeostasis? Why do we have it? Well, it's a stable environment. We have it because cells function best under a certain set of conditions. Okay. Anybody has questions, you can ask questions. Feel free. You can interrupt me. It's no big deal. I'm just kind of going through here. Negative feedback, usually homeostasis works by negative feedback. Negative means that it opposes change. So it's the opposite. Let's see. All organisms are made of cells. In anatomy, usually we get down to the cell level, cellular chemical level when we talk about an organ system. We'll talk about how muscles work, and we wind up talking about muscle cells. And so I won't have a diagram of a cell having you label things, but I might ask you questions about a muscle cell. So you probably won't see this diagram, but I'll ask you about things that happen at the cell membrane of a muscle cell or a neuron, or one of those cells that we've talked about in a lot of detail. So we've talked about skin cells in some detail, some of the bone cells, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, muscle cells, nerve cells. We've talked about them in quite a bit of detail. Likewise with tissue, um, I'm not going to ask you a lot about tissues, but you'll have to know about tissues to answer questions about organs. And so for the skin, you'll have to know, okay, the epidermis is an epithelial tissue, layers of packed cells. And those cells, there's different types of cells there. Most contain keratin, some are making melanin. Okay, the lower layer of the skin is the dermis, a different kind of tissue, and different kinds of cells in there, and they're making collagen. There's also lots of the accessory structures there. With the skin, I'm likely to ask you about skin color, about skin temperature, basic mechanisms of how things happen. This idea with each organ system, you should be able to talk about, what does it do? What does this organ system do? It has specific functions. And sometimes we go into a lot of detail, like on temperature. We did a lot of detail on also on ultraviolet light, because when we talk about skin cancer, it's partially you're talking about damage caused by UV light, and over time there's different types of skin cancers, and so those are big deals. And most organ systems will have that. They'll have a function, and then I usually talk about a disorder there. So that's kind of important. Skeletal system, again, support, protection, movement, stores calcium, stores phosphorate, stores fat, and then produces blood cells. I kind of like the illustration there. That's good. And again, this is not where I'm going to do a lot of diagrams for, to identify parts, but for these structures in a bone, you should be able to kind of say, well, what happens at that structure? Why is that structure important? And so, the epiphyseal disc, that's the growth plate. The periosteum is the membrane that surrounds all bones, and it contains cells that are involved in repairing of bones and remodeling of bones, those osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Okay. So things like bone formation and growth, that's a big deal. Bones can grow in length when for cartilage bones, when there's that cartilage plate there. For the membrane bones, they grow at the site of the suture, is where they're growing at the edges. Here in this system, the kind of key homeostatic type mechanism we talked about was calcium balance. Calcium is really important for nerve cell function, for muscle cell function. And so we maintain the levels of calcium in the blood at a very specific level. Bone is the long-term storage site of calcium, and it can help us maintain our normal calcium levels, because if we have too much calcium, osteoblasts take calcium out of the blood and they store it. If the blood doesn't have enough calcium, parathyroid hormone causes a different bone cell, osteoclasts, to release calcium. And so these are, kind of a dual negative feedback mechanism, and here it's centered on a gland. So, and osteoporosis is just a long-term loss of calcium from bone. Okay, muscle system functions. They produce movement at the joints by contracting. They also hold us in position, posture. Movement of air in and out of the lungs is ventilation, so our respiratory system depends on that. Muscles produce lots of waste heat. They're involved in communication, both in facial expression and in the production of voice. And then we have lots of muscles associated with organs, internal organs. Here we spent a lot of time here on muscle cells. They're kind of specialized. They have these giant bundles of proteins, the myofibrils. Actin and myosin are important there. And then you have wrapped around these, you have the sarcoplasmic reticulum that releases the calcium needed for contraction. You have mitochondria stashed between the myofibrils. They produce the ATP needed. And then the specialized sarcolemma and transverse tubules bring the action potential close to where it can get things going. And so again, the sliding filament there, those bundles of protein, actin and myosin, They require lots of ATP, lots of calcium for cross bridges to form. And that's how contraction occurs. Here we talked about energy. Some muscles are specialized to get energy from the aerobic breakdown of foods. So they can use glucose or fat, and they break it down in the presence of oxygen to release lots of energy. So these guys have lots of blood vessels. They store oxygen in the form of myoglobin. And most of this happens in the mitochondria, so they have lots of mitochondria. These are kind of our endurance muscles. The sprinters you see here are using muscles that are adapted for anaerobic activities. Okay, these have a very fast myosin, and that myosin gives maximum power and contracts faster than the myosin in aerobic muscles. And so these are the fast glycolytic fibers. The bad news, though, is they can only use glucose as a source of energy, and they use glucose at a tremendous rate, and they convert it to lactic acid. So they poop out in about 30 seconds. And so these guys are, they're very muscular, and they can do amazing things. They can run almost 30 miles an hour, but then they're done. 30 seconds and they're done. So we talked about that. Okay. Then about a third of the course was the nervous system. So a huge part of this course is the nervous system. Overall functions, handle sensory input, direct motor output, and then integrate. Integration means that make decisions based on multiple different types of sensory inputs. Most integration is done in the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system does a little bit, but it's mostly carrying impulses from one region to another. So that's kind of the general functions here. Again, the structure, central nervous system is brain and spinal cord, encased in bone, wrapped in meninges, floating in cerebral spinal fluid, huge numbers of neurons, lots of axons and dendrites. Peripheral nervous system is mostly axons and dendrites. This is spinal nerves, cranial nerves, and some ganglia, which are some nerve cell bodies, but not as many as you'd think. And so there's some there. Again, we talked about cells. We talked about more details about these membrane potentials. You have these in muscle cells, but here we spent more time on them in neurons. Okay. Both neurons and muscle cells are charged. They are more negative on the inside and more positive on the outside. There is more sodium on the outside, more potassium on the inside. So you have this gradient of charge and chemical gradient. Okay. When something activates a neuron, you start opening these ion channels. And if enough of them open to pass a threshold, you trigger an action potential. And this is where ion channels open, lots of sodium enters the cell becomes positive, and as the channels close, the sodium channels close, other channels open to allow potassium to move out, and so you get this, first the cell becomes positive, and then it goes back to negative again. And this spreads over the surface of the cell, and so the cell sends messages very, very quickly. Okay. At the end of the cell, you have a synapse, a junction between two cells, and here's where most neurons will signal other neurons with a chemical messenger, a neurotransmitter. And that chemical messenger will bind to a receptor and activate some sort of mechanism on the second cell. It can excite the cell or it can inhibit the cell. Okay, there's a lot of detail there. I'm talking about it fast, but I'm going over kind of the basic things. Then we spent a lot of time on brain areas, learning the brain anatomy. Here's a frontal section. It shows nicely the two hemispheres of the cerebrum, and that white band there connecting it, that's the corpus callosum. That's kind of cool. So we should be able to identify brain areas, the ones listed here for sure, and kind of be able to assemble a function there. This shows nicely the difference between gray matter and white matter too. That's pretty cool. Nice picture. The cerebrum has these cerebral cortex areas or cortical areas. So these are parts of the cerebrum. You should be able to identify a function for those. So frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital should be able to give me a good idea of what goes on in each of those areas. Particularly important are frontal areas. Frontal does a lot of motor control where it has to respond quickly, but it also has the prefrontal areas which is where your thoughts and feelings are experienced. That contains your executive functions, working memory, judgment, impulse control, that's all there. And then from the frontal lobe, you have these motor pathways that are going to go down. They'll link up with lots of other processing areas that go on in the cerebellum, in the red nucleus, substantia nigra, and these control motor activities, part of the somatic system. Other somatic system functions are sensory, and we spent a lot of time on the eye. Okay, the actual receptor cells are the retina, just a thin layer of cells. The eye works to get the right amount of light in focus on the retina. So you have the lens and the iris that are working to kind of coordinate things so that the retina gets a nice image on it. Okay, the retina itself contains receptor cells of two types. Well, actually more than two types. There are rods, which are linked up to show they're to be sensitive, the presence or absence of light. And then there are several types of cones, and the cones respond to different colors or wavelengths. And in all cases, what happens is there's a pigment that when light hits it, it splits into retinol and this opsin, and the opsin is what's going to trigger the impulse that's going to go back through the optic nerve to the brain. Okay, and then here's a nice picture of the ear. The ear is kind of similar. If you have a single layer of receptor cells that are hidden away in an organ, these receptor cells are called the hair cells, and they're mechanoreceptors that detect vibration in a fluid. And so vibrations in air are captured by the eardrum, the tympanic membrane. Then they're transferred to the malleus, incus, and stapes, the little bones that are connected by synovial joints. And the stapes is like a plunger. It's what turns the vibrations from the air into vibrations from the fluid. And then all along the cochlea here, this blue tube that's curled up, partially uncurled to show, are the receptor cells. And the vibrations in fluid are detected stronger in some areas than others, and that's where we determine the pitch. Okay, the ear also has hair cells in other places used for our sense of equilibrium. And so in the vestibule, you have a closed chamber lined by hair cells along the sides. And depending on how you position your head, this way or that way, different parts of the chamber are stimulated. And so the brain detects that as head position. In another part of the inner ear, you have the three semicircular canals. These are circular tubes filled with fluid. And if you turn your head quickly in one direction or another, you can make that fluid rotate in those tubes. And depending on which way you turn it, it'll rotate more strongly in one tube or another. And so some of the hair cells in that tube will tell the brain the head is rotating. Okay. So then the last two chapters were chapters where there'll be probably some more questions on. These were the autonomic nervous system, chapter 15. Okay, this was a motor system that activates the smooth muscles and glands of our organs and blood vessels and things like that. So this is, it's motor, but it's not voluntary. It's hidden away, so it's not part of the somatic system. And this is a kind of unique system in that the organs, it's a 2-neuron pathway to get there. For the somatic system, it's a 1-neuron pathway. and each organ gets innervation by two different branches of the system, by the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So it's a different type of system, and so that's kind of unusual. So the parasympathetic, here that's shown on the right side of the chart, the reddish side. That's the rest and digest response, and this comes from cranial nerves and sacral spinal nerves. And here there's a long first neuron, and it synapses with a second neuron, which is right at the organ. So there's these very small terminal ganglia. And at the site of the organ, this will release acetylcholine. Okay, and acetylcholine will determine the effect at the organ. And so for the digestive system, it speeds up digestion. It causes the liver to secrete things. It causes the pancreas to be more active. It'll also speed up blood flow to the kidney and cause urine formation. It'll cause the salivary glands to be more active. It'll speed up what's going on in the bladder. Okay, then the other side of this chart, the left side, is the sympathetic side. That's the fight or flight response. This comes from different nerves. These are the thoracic and lumbar spinal nerves. Okay, and here the first neuron is short, and so there are big ganglia that you can find, and so they show them as the chain ganglia or the collateral ganglia, and there's then a second neuron. The second neuron releases a different neurotransmitter than the parasympathetic division. It releases norepinephrine, and norepinephrine will kind of cause the fight or flight response. It reduces blood flow to the digestive system. It slows digestion. It slows urine formation. It directs blood flow to the skeletal muscles. It causes the adrenal gland to secrete adrenaline. It increases the heart rate and force of contraction. It opens the airways. So different effects. And I talked about this as stress. The sympathetic system prepares us for danger. It's also kind of the response that happens when we're stressed. So there's a lot related to stress there. Okay, so this is part of the peripheral nervous system, but of course it's directed by central nervous system structures. Okay, and so these responses, parasympathetic and sympathetic, are controlled primarily in centers in the lower part of the brain, and the main one of these is the hypothalamus. And this control it's beyond conscious thought, but it's affected by conscious thought because this hypothalamus is also connected to our frontal lobe as part of the emotional system and behavioral system. So our thoughts can affect the way our organs function. The hypothalamus regulates body temperature, water intake, food intake, lots of endocrine functions, reproductive activities. These are all taken care of there. And so this is one of the main centers controlling the autonomic nervous system. The other main centers are in the midbrain, in the pons, and in the medulla. And so here you can kind of see this in this diagram. These control these autonomic activities, and these are largely reflexes. They're kind of slow reflexes, but they're reflexes, and so this is going out through this autonomic nervous system. Okay, and the last chapter was the neurological exam. This is done to assess people's neurological function. The mental status exam can be used for dementia. You use this for patients if you suspect stroke or a concussion or any kind of traumatic injury. The cranial nerve exam is to assess the function of the cranial nerves. Again, that could be there could be a variety of physiological conditions that could affect that. There could also be trauma injuries that could affect that. The sensory and motor exams are looking at nerve pathways that are going through the spinal cord, again, trauma could do that. Certain neurological kind of conditions could affect those. And then the coordination exam or the gait exam, that's looking at motor pathways that often involve the cerebellum. Okay, what's next here? When I was talking about these, I also talked about memory, mental status exam. One of the big things is that this is assessing memory, short-term and long-term memory. And so here was a good chance to talk about the things that affect memory. We put things in long-term memory kind of under certain conditions. That includes repeated exposure. That's one of the most important conditions, but also linking it. If it's linked to other sensory inputs or other things that are in long-term activity or linking to motor activities, it's likely to be stored in long-term memory. If there's a strong emotion to it, it is likely to be in memory. And then we build all these long-term memories. We consolidate them during sleep. So sleep has an important role. Here's where I talked a lot about dementia. Dementia has a variety of causes. Most importantly, aging is a big cause, but also lots of conditions caused by alcohol, drug abuse, sometimes caused by anesthesia, so can be a big issue, and infections can cause that. When we talk about dementia, probably the most important things we notice are memory changes that affect things like problem solving, language, mood, and these are all linked to structural changes. With dementia and mental status exam, one of the things you're assessing is our prefrontal areas and the ability to do things that like inhibit limbic system and impulse control and things like that. So that's an important aspect of it. Another thing that you would probably do is look at complex activities like language. Language is an important thing to look at. Okay. Ooh, that was long. All right. Okay, again, if you came in late, make sure your name went into the chat. We're having our final exam next week. There's it's online, of course, so that you'll take that at home. You have 2 hours, approximately 70, 80 some questions, so longer than a regular exam. Emphasis on physiology, extra emphasis on the last 2 chapters. Okay, does anybody have any questions? The essay questions are available in this week's this week's box. So those essays are there. There's also a practice test. I'll post the answers to the practice test later today. What else was I going to say? If you have any questions, you can text me. You can look at those essay questions, though. They're similar to essay questions that we had before, but they are special for this one. But they're available. You can look at them. Anything else? Okay. I think that's probably it. I will copy this and post it. There's already one there, review there. This is the last time we're going to meet. However, if you have your scissors, your forceps from doing your dissection, the next time you're at Highland, you can go past my office door. There's a little cart there, and you can drop off those tools. Okay, the old organs I don't need; those are yours to keep. You can, scrapbook them or whatever you want. You can hang them from your Christmas tree, but you can turn those tools in whenever you want. That cart will sit there for the next 2 weeks outside my office. And if you would forget, you can turn it in after the break as well. So it's not a big deal. I'll send a message about that. Um, yeah, so exam next week, Monday and Tuesday. It's open. It's open all from Monday from I think 11 to whenever Monday, and then Tuesday night it closes at 11. So you have to get it in that time. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. You can type them in or you could just say them. Okay. All right. So study hard. Watch. There'll be a couple announcements in the box for us, and then I'll come to you with email. So I'll say a couple of these things in announcements. Again, if you have missing assignments, turn them in. I will still grade them. Okay. That's all. Thank you. Study hard and good luck. I will see you later.